and how integrating a digital approach to the studio and jewelry practice, why the use of 3D modeling, scanning, and printing are critical components of my research and conceptual approach, and how having a conversation which essentially demystifies the associated applications from merely aligning with trends or fads, yet provides a contemporary appreciation honoring the tradition and history embedded in jewelry and metal arts from a standpoint of working with digital technologies. If I can figure out how to click to my next slide. So a little bit about my background. I recently received my Master's of Fine Arts in Metalsmithing and Jewelry Design from Indiana University in Bloomington in August 2015. So while I was there, I studied under the mentorship of Nicole Jacquard and Randy Long, and yeah, recently graduated. So a lot of my work over the past couple years has dealt with brushing and brush-like objects. So I'm inspired particularly in use of the shaving brush, drawing inspiration from how it's made, visual translations, as well as material appropriation. This is one of the pieces made about brush-like qualities with a fox fur pelt as well as electroform copper soldered back together with gold. My father's a welder, and as well as one of his brothers, and I'm always surrounded by welding industry, especially in his practice with ductwork and making ventilation systems for various buildings going up. So with brushing, I really think it's an interesting thing to be reminded of the jewelry on the body by having jewelry brush you while it's being worn or interacting in the public sphere. These works started to become ambiguous yet phallic, and also allowed me to express thoughts on how I want to posture my public and wear with the use of intimate format jewelry. So this was my first object. This was shown at AV17 Gallery for the last metal biennial, and it's electroform copper, once again with fur. So this was inspired by using the mnemonic properties and device of an object and seeing how it could relate to the contemporary American male experience. Shaving being one of those rites of passage and an intimate experience to the face was particularly unique at this time to me, so I wanted to see how I could reappropriate that type of device. Now, in August 2014, I was invited by M Contemporary Gallery that's in Woollahra, Sydney, Australia, to make a body of work for their, let's say, inaugural contemporary art jewelry exhibition called Intimately Connected. So analog was my first body of work, particularly using brush-like formats as a way to express intimacy inherent within jewelry. This is a screenshot of my, my studio space in graduate school. As you see, I'm not a very organized artist. But really, I like to think that I make parts, combine parts, remove parts through an additive and subtractive process, fluidly working with material properties. I do very little sketching, planning, and preconceiving of a piece while I'm in progress making a body of work. Yet I like to think I work through material and begin to edit, add, and work with the piece as it develops. My sketching is mostly like gestural qualities. Yeah, anyway, a little bit about my process. So at first, I really wanted to focus on wood turning, carving of exotic woods to make handle-like forms in order to pose this brush against the body. So I really took to wood turning for a while. So I would spend time on the lathe making free-form components that would then be brought back to my bench to be manipulated, modified, and reconfigured as an object later on. So by slicing, carving, and adding supportive biscuit fixtures, these parts would really start to take on a gestural quality of their own. They're very similar to limbs and articulated joints, yet also refer to ductwork qualities. And I find very important to really what gave me an aesthetic from growing up seeing my dad working in the welding industry. Now in July 14, when I started this body of work, came to the point where 3D modeling really made sense for a piece. I took my first Rhino CAD modeling and rendering class with Nicole Jacquard in spring 2013, and it took me a full year to figure out how I could actually appropriate digital technologies into my studio practice in a fluid manner. My undergraduate was at Buffalo State College in Buffalo, New York, where I'm originally from, and I was brought up with a very traditional arts and crafts sense mentality that in a metalsmithing and jewelry program, you could only use metal and only make hollowware vessels, make jewelry, but when I first started grad school, I was very much a traditional metalsmith in the sense that I had the view that if you use 3D printing, then there was this loss of the hand in the quality of the work, and it really just kind of detested me at the time. And ultimately, the furthest I would go outside of using metal was putting enamel onto metal, which is still a traditional metalsmithing practice. So at this time in July 14, I was designing a necklace, and it was going to be 6 parts faceted together on Rhino, but to outsource that and be produced through a company called Shapeways here in the States, it would be $400 per part. So, which I didn't have the budget for at the time. I don't have the budget for it now. And really I just went, instead of shelling out the money to make one piece, why don't I just put forth the effort to buy a printer? And then after purchasing this printer, I learned the schematics of how a printer operates, how I can print in-house, and made it for a fraction of the cost. So instead of spending $400 a part, I ended up paying $14 for each component with the material. In this photo, this is when I first set up the CubeX Duo. It's in my office today. It's acting more like a table now. It's having issues. But anyway, this was my first time operating it as an open source machine and spooling filament from the side. I find it particularly hilarious how a sophisticated piece of equipment can really rely on a hammer to prop everything up and become a spooling unit on the side. This is an image of how I would turn a piece of wood and then program male and female joints in order to securely fashion exotic wood to a PLA printed piece. So on the left, that's the wood turn object. On the right, that's me using Rhino, measuring the dimensions with a caliper, and then programming it directly into the software. I could create an extension off of that piece itself. Now, I was really drawn to the material quality, and still am, with PLA plastics. So PLA stands for polylactic acid, and it's a biodegradable, compostable, 3D printed extrudable material that's originally a derivative of corn and soy byproduct that through a particular polyamide process becomes this filament. So the fact that it came from nature originally and then went through this polymer process to become this filament really it captivates me. So it also provides a natural-esque quality. The build lines and inherent structure of 3D printing and creating layer by layer by layer by layer by layer on top of one another to create a three-dimensional form really reminds me of the rings and grain structure of wood, and how this can also be sanded, carved, manipulated later on to show off those grain structures. This photo shows an image on the left. That's the 3D model rendering of an object, and then on the right, that's the printed component. And this was my first component actually print on the CubeX Duo, leading into a piece. And this is the final version later on. So really, after the piece is printed, I bring it back to my studio, and using a wax file, wood sandpaper, plastic sandpaper, refine that surface to put my hand back into the printed object. And then this one was spray painted matte black, and you see it on the model. So now, To backtrack to this particular state, I never see 3D printing as a means to an end. The design field and the art field became rather oversaturated with 3D printed end-use products, and I find it really horribly boring. So by bringing it back into my studio, um, I sand, file, carve, insert my hand, and also work with the surface to create a variety of illusions that can be compared to wood, bone, stone, any other natural material, but that's only by using the capabilities of 3D printing to create this form and also this particular plastic. So in this contemporary manufacturing process, I really find it an interesting time to participate in the field because we can add to a conversation further developing what a printed piece can be, how it can be appropriated on the body or as jewelry in an exhibition or even in a sculptural object. So I see this as really the beginning of a next wave. This piece later on, let's see, what is this? I was using a graphite and urethane surface and built up about 15 layers so it takes on the pure sheen of graphite. I like that association to figurative sculpture as well in order to see lumps, bumps, and inconsistencies while you're modeling clay through the use of graphite. Once again, I never really sketch out a plan, but sketch directly on material. All the fur I use in my work comes from heirloom furs handed down to me from my family members. This particular deer pelt, my uncle's a hunter, and I'm one of the only ones in my family that have never actually gone out hunting. So he gifted me this pelt. It's a 27-year-old deer pelt that still holds a New York State record for rack size, and I guess I really have no clue how anything's rated and ranked in the whole hunting scheme. But the fact that I'm using this deer pelt to particularly describe a sense of masculinity, I can also simultaneously question what it is to be a man in today's age in America. And this is the end piece. So all the leather that's used for the neck strap is also from that same deer pelt. So I'm shaving it down with a beard trimmer as a way to once again insert my hand and this shaving masculine quality through a reductive process. This is another piece called Stolfa that was part of the series of work as well. Rather large piece, but it also seeks to provide an intimate, luxurious experience that's only provided by the function of the brushing quality and our association to jewelry. Now, as jewelry, the immediacy of being present on the body has become an important factor in why I continually navigate amongst the wearable object. Jewelry itself, to me, defines placement, infers the body, and is also a discipline rooted in craft, communicates the importance of touch and the hand. This body of work ended, but really I hope to present a dialogue surrounding intimate, analogous physical experiences that then springboarded into my MFA thesis exhibition. Now, while I was at the opening of Intimately Connected and seeing the viewers of my work go by this and check out, I think there were about 10 people in the show at 12, something like that. But we're always programmed to not touch objects, to not touch fine art. You would never go up and just brush your hand against a painting. And I think I have a tactile pose that I get trouble in galleries because I just want to touch everything. The physical experience to me is very important, and I think that's why I identify as a jeweler as well. Actually, I know that's a big part of why I identify as a jeweler. But seeing these pieces installed in the gallery at the time, one by one, people were walking by, and instead of just looking, I would see my viewer brush their face against my work. And I just started to think, how odd. You would never have that type of interactive quality and invitation to engage with work if it wasn't for, one, jewelry, but also maybe this brush, this sense of evoking an emotional quality that makes you want to interact with it, and being able and invited to engage in that experience. After seeing this, I began to think about the universal nature of tactile experience and the ubiquitous presence of the brush. I was halfway across the world, and going to Sydney, Australia was my first time out of the country except for going to Canada. But it was so powerful in the way that I could be that far away and still have an impact on my viewer and an invitation to engage with this type of experience. So moving forward, I began to look to the physiological, psychological, and metaphoric properties of touch, and my thesis body of work, Plume, became an attempt to reappropriate and reposition the tactile experience of brushing from utilitarian object into the format of adornment. So I would research the psychological devices evident in experiencing touch and look to a wide variety of brushes and brush-like qualities for inspiration, and also a variety of brush-like cutaneous experiences. So a piece like this, in order for these works to function as jewelry, the wearer is brushed by the work itself. The hair-like qualities we see that are secured into a carved piece of curly maple here are all hand extruded and pulled and spun to the quality of like thread and extensions, I guess, in a way. But it's all me interacting with the printer, setting it to a particular temperature and RPM extrusion, and as it's going, I'm pulling and spinning and making this thread by hand. So it's integrating the printing process directly imposed with my own fastening. And same thing in this piece. I would carve curly maple and then use finger joints as a way to imply the body as a connective device to the rest of the jewelry and back into the body. So on the left, that front side, we see carved, or sorry, it's maple burl. Yeah, maple burl. And then 3D printed plastic form with spray paint. And then all the yellow bristles coming out are hand spun from the printer. And I continued this practice to not only print forms, but how can I work with that as a springboard to then bring back to the studio, work with the surface, provide a material illusion that isn't so blatantly exposed as a 3D printed object. The moment I see a 3D printed piece that exposes build lines and that type of process and structure, I have a hard time getting past the fact that it is 3D printed. It becomes very process-based work. So this for me was the next step into developing a conversation and material language of this process is solely only a technique. This brooch, it's a gold PLA, and what you see from the front and the back are those build lines that start to show off a texture that can allude to wood or another natural-esque material. This was one of my favorite pieces of the series. Before becoming a metalsmith and jeweler, I studied trumpet for 5 years and was an orchestral musician. So I'm constantly going back, rather consistently, to the funnel-like form as a way for me to speak about the trumpet's quality of speaking a fanfare and calling attention to a particular moment, a celebration, in that kind of it can become convoluted conceptual manner. But this is gold PLA mink fur from my grandma, and also 18 karat gold. This is another piece, Long and Longus, that has once again gestural quality and moving to use a tan PLA. But at this point, I would not only print a solid object and manipulate it, I began to print objects in two parts to decrease my material use, save on my cost, and then using a PLA extrusion pen, weld it back together in order to show off a seam, much like soldering and working with metal. So this was an installation shot from the exhibition itself, and I wanted to connect to my viewers through the action of touch, so I allowed every viewer in the museum and encouraged them and invited to pick up the work, wear it, set it back down, and have that type of intimate experience within a museum setting where that is clearly defined. I had to train my museum security guards in order to allow that type of experience, and also meet with plenty of administrators at the Indiana University Art Museum as well to allow for that to happen. But it was incredibly rewarding. The plaque in the back on that central post, you can see it's my artist statement at the top, but then I had to have a caution warning label printed because of the use of rare earth magnets, neodymium magnets, that can cause disruption with, if they attach to your cell phone, they're going to fry it. They're going to, anytime a magnet hits anything, it's just going to fry out any kind of electronics, but it can be particularly hazardous for someone wearing a pacemaker to put this piece on their body. So the day before the exhibition opened, I had to have a meeting with safety and risk management at the university, who came by the work with a electromagnetic wand to measure the pull. And they determined that the work itself wasn't hazardous to anyone wearing a pacemaker because it wouldn't even be able to have a magnetic field that would go and touch the battery of the pacemaker. But because of the removable backings, my jewelry was deemed a choking hazard for small children. So I really question at this point how many children are running around a museum unsupervised eating artwork. But currently, starting last August, I am assistant professor of metals and contemporary art jewelry at UW Stout, and this is a shot of our main studio when I first got here. Within the past year, I've been using Rhino 3D modeling in a couple of different varieties. One is to model a form and then smash the form in order to create a template. And this is directly applied into my classroom setting in pedagogical methods, where if I have a student creating something out of sheet metal, and it's a rather arduous task to make a paper model, a cardboard model, something like that, we can quickly make a form on the computer and then get an exact to-scale template in order to recreate a form later on through fabrication methods. That's really readily available at this point. So I'd use this template. This particular template was used to cut out fur from that same deer hide I mentioned before, and then stitch together a form extending from another plastic component. So really, modeling software has enabled me to create precise forms, not only with printing, but in this variety of my studio practice and application. This is a photo of the final piece. That template and stitch sewing bit I was showing in the previous side is the form extending from the bottom of the piece. Also, the copper colored component, that's my first time using Frontline's copper composite PLA material. And each PLA I approach, especially when it comes down to metal being integrated into the construct of that polymer, reacts differently when you carve it, sand it, file it. This one had this really sweet softness to it that was almost like lotion to the skin. And I loved working with this material. Which brings me to work that's currently being shown in AV17 gallery for Metallophone. So when I was planning for this year's biennial, this was my only piece that really had a clear metal application, and you could see that material on the bottom. And this was the only piece I could apply at the time that really that had only metal in it. But the copper composite PLA extension, I really got fascinated with creating a copper-on-copper duality through traditions and material process. This piece is titled Homologous Copper, and it was based on a conversation on questioning the authenticity of material. In this piece, it specifically addresses the tradition of raising copper for functional use through hollowware and the tradition of raising, reproposing this historic application within the sculptural object form, intersecting this process and material with the 3D printed copper composite PLA handle. I felt that it all alludes to the hand and function brought upon due to the history of craft, material, and appropriation. So I'm questioning overall what's copper and copper. How much copper is really in this PLA? How could it be seen as copper? And then the next piece, this was my test, and just kind of going for it because I didn't have anything else that had a metal sheet in it or was cast or had any other traditional metalsmithing and jeweler applications to it. But I wanted to apply this brooch specifically because it's stainless steel composite PLA that's produced through a company called Protopasta through Protoplant here as well. This material is really fascinating to me because of not only its hygroscopic properties, but the way you can sand, carve, and file the surface in order to take on the finish and surface of steel. So this piece started much more flat, but then hygroscopic manipulation deals with boiling water and then placing PLA directly in it, in which it becomes flexible but doesn't melt, doesn't extend, it doesn't have this kind of elastic quality that you can slump it over a form, or you can even squish it together and work with it directly with your hand, and as it cools, it takes on that form. Because of the build process of 3D printing and using PLA, it has a material memory, so if something doesn't go right, you can go directly back to boiling water and it's going to want to expand back into its original form. And that's unlike any other plastic, resin, or polymer I've worked with in the past. And having this piece in the show is really, it's really important to me that the progression of our metal arts field, and especially this specific gallery, considers metal art and jewelry not to only be working with metal and making jewelry, but they accept the fact that new materials create this type of unique conversation that they want to add to and expose the public to. And it's incredibly progressive, really. And also, this work ultimately challenges what metal is accepted in the final creative artwork. Now, the back of this piece, I'm going to take a sip of coffee quick. It's like 11-ish, 30 here in the morning. So the back of this piece, I'm using a 3D extrusion pen. It's commonly called a 3D pen, but if you ever see on YouTube where people are just drawing up into space and creating something freeform, it's totally falsified. This thing isn't magic, it's a hot glue gun with a motor, alright? So the back of this is made, and I like to consider a textile technique where I'm doing loop and loop, boop, 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 this nice detailed edge. And it's all wood flower composite PLA. So it has wood directly integrated into that filament as well. So it's really just wood and steel. Yeah. Now, a current artist who I find really truly fascinating and operating amongst this same arena and conversation includes jewelry made by Caitlin Skelsey, who's currently a graduate student at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. So with these works, she states, the printed aesthetic bestows upon the work of machine-made plastic immortality, and the pieces act as a facsimile of the fragmented bones and the biological forms at work beneath the skin. These forms in my work defy the process from which they originate, abandoning the expected aesthetic of the 3D printed form, and grow from a broken hybrid reality. These two sentences from her statement really spoke true to why I'm doing what I'm doing, and resonated with me not only on a technical but a conceptual level. Pushing 3D printing past the mundane, the expected, the overused, and the calculated approach to an industrial application. Now a little bit about what's going on currently at UW-Stout in our metals program. We received a lab modernization grant that my colleague Moscow Onodera wrote before I even got here, and I had the opportunity and privilege to be able to add to the conversation while we received funds to revamp the entire studio space. So we purchased 2 Ultimaker 2 Extended Pluses, like this machine. This is one of the machines. A Form 2 SLA resin printer, as well as a David SLS3 high-resolution 3D scanner. This machine, it roughly builds an object about 10 by 10 by 12 inches, and it operates fused deposition modeling, which I've got some videos going on here. So it's extruding material and writing a three-dimensional image that's then sliced in 3D form over and over and over again to create an object. Now, the 3D scanner has been a really important part of my practice as a way to straddle the digital and physical interfaces and back and forth nature between digital and physical platforms. So recently I've been working to develop a series of pieces based on thinking about fertility, and being a gay male and that's married in America today, not being able to independently procreate with my husband has been this thing to straddle, especially when questioned, when do you guys plan to adopt? Oh, are you going to get a surrogate? And I find it this odd expectation that marriage leads to procreation, and then especially when it's an artificial mode and method of procreation. So I'm using condoms filled with plasters to create forms that are then 3D scanned, as well as filling different latex and neoprene gloves with plaster as well and scanning those. So I'm thinking about the protective latex device and the thin barrier between us and the world that can be harmful, detrimental, and is posed as protective as well. How that can ultimately be fashioned and posed in the public sphere as jewelry and held on oneself as kind of a trophy or a trope. So a little bit about technique here. This is a video of the 3D scanner operating. So what happens is with an auto leveling arm and an auto turntable, the projector is projecting a series of patterns on top of an object while the camera is picking up digital imagery in topographical form. So based on the aperture and what's in focus, what's not in focus, it creates a 3D form. I just love watching this video. It's a time-lapse video, it doesn't go that fast. But what it does is it outputs a PNG file as well as a modeling file later on that documents the transition of this form it's scanning, and ultimately outputs a fused scan that can be saved as a stereolithographic STL file, an object file, or a PLY file. Now, just because something's scanned, once again, like if I print something, I'm not going to go, boom, here it is in my piece. I'm not going to present it as a final form. I completely understand how that could be relevant conceptually to the work of any artist, jeweler, maker. However, I find that to not be where I'm going, and a rather boring conclusion in creating artwork. So just like a scan, I'm not going to scan something and print something. I bring it into Rhinoceros 5 3D modeling software in order to manipulate it, create a gesture, and work with that surface. Um, now, I like to compare my laptop to a mobile studio. That if I'm in an airport and I don't want to talk to anyone, or I'm traveling, I always have my computer on me, and I can always be making something. I can be ideating. And using the computer, something Nicole Picard said to me in grad school is you can make more mistakes and corrections and think through thoughts in 5 minutes on the screen and with the software than you could do in a week with material. And that completely holds true. I can think quicker. I can make mistakes faster. I can control Z and undo. And if I'm working with template model making and constructing and making something in precious metal or even carved wood, I have this kind of fear and risk factor about making that mistake. Although I could learn from that mistake, and the mistakes are most likely things that are going to be the most exciting anyway later on. So, a little bit about the Form 2 printer. Oop, there we go. So it's a stereolithographic process that has a UV 405 nanometer wavelength ultraviolet ray coming from the back of the machine that's directed by a series of optical mirrors that ultimately create a path in order for an object to be printed. I think I missed a slide. Oh, I'll backtrack to this one. So once you have a model done in Rhino, you export it as an STL file that's going to be a series of tessellated topographical mesh, creating a three-dimensional form. With this piece, I wanted to see if I could create a complete printed photopolymer resin hollow form with no supports on the inside that would be fully closed and actually float on water. So here what we see in the video going on is a little Tinkerbell green light from the base. And that's going through an acrylic optical sheet that's then going through a silicone layer that acts as a delaminating device for this object to be removed from the bed and print layer by layer by layer by layer, and simultaneously a layer of the object with a layer of the supports. Now, this printing method can produce an object in half the time and double the resolution of traditional FDM formats. So the object printing in this video is 50 micron resolution, so it's 20 layers in every millimeter of the object, which is very. It can even get down to 25 microns, which is really great for making jewelry. Now, this piece that was printed in this method then came back to my studio. I sanded the surface, and then I have it with me right here. So I wanted to see if I could use and paint photopolymer resin on the surface of the object itself, and then cure it with UV light as a way to act as like a spray coating and glossy surface. But most recently, I've been experimenting with, porcelain. And porcelain, it's produced through a company called Metallophone 3D. It's a mixture of porcelain clay, methylated monomers, oligomers, and a photo initiator that you can print with porcelain and then bisque fire it, glaze it, and during the firing process in a kiln, the resin is completely burned out and you're left with vitrified porcelain clay, which is really amazing. This close-up shot just shows the detail of the build lines as well as the support structure in order to start pulling it out of the bath of resin securely without it slipping and falling off, taking a plunge and making a mess. And this is when I go back to my studio. So I'm always working. That's what I look like in the studio most of the time. And my students know that if you see me with my headphones on and an apron, don't bother asking a question about your work. But that aside, these four pieces are the beginning of this new series of work. Not the third barnacle-looking one. That was more of a test just to see if I could get this material to work. But just like working with any other printed object, I bring it back, file, sand, carve, and then bisque fire. And now I'm going to be experimenting with liquid enameling on the surface of these objects coming soon. So I haven't finished any of these pieces yet, but I'm going to be developing a body slowly and surely, and hope to show this in the upcoming future. And that is it. So I would be absolutely happy to take questions. Please send in some. Oh, I'll show you around my studio quick. How about that? I just can't see. There I am. All right. The whole time during that presentation, I couldn't see my actual webinar camera. So over here, we have the Form 2. And it's just finishing the last 8 minutes of an object printing right now. I don't know if there's a really good view to show this. But that'll be starting back up in a second. This object is 103 millimeters tall, and in that has 2,399 layers. Oh, there we go. I still am organizing my studio space, but this is an example of a small base form with porcelain that has been bisque fired and glazed with a matte white. Oops, sorry. Ooh. I just sent a message to everyone under chat to see if you could all still see me. Oh, great. Okay. I didn't know if I turned off my camera accidentally. So as you see, I go from printing. Next to it is my bench. And these are examples of those porcelain forms that I plan to create oxidized sterling silver backings for and prong set them as brooches. And then I'll go back to the bench in a second. This is the David SLS 3D scanner and my coffee creamer. But we can hang out by the bench. This is an example of what a stainless steel composite PLA object looks like when it first comes out of the printer that I'm going to be sanding and refining. And then here's an example of what the photopolymer resin clear print looks like when it first comes out, so supports have to be removed. And then filing and sanding goes on later. And then after UV resistant coating, this is in a prototype for a necklace pendant. Yeah. And then I also make rings. But it's really, I wish you guys could feel how light this is. These they feel like shell, and when you rub your hand across them, they kind of sound like shell as well. And let's see, this is a necklace in progress as well. And yeah. So thank you all for taking the time to log in and listen to me talk and share about this practice. I'll be hanging out here, so if anyone has any questions, please correspond with me in the chat. So thank you all for your time.